Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time.
Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm Amanda Anguish, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm joined by my co-host and semi-guest.
I'm Dr. Daniel Binus, and I am a psychiatrist.
And I have a question for our audience. Have you ever been hurt by someone and felt like you just couldn't get past the anger and bitterness? We're actually going to be talking about that today. And as you're thinking maybe about something in your own life, I'm going to ask Dr. Binus some questions, and maybe you can apply these questions to and the answers to something that maybe you've been through, something you're going through. So my first question, Dr. Binus, is I asked a question about not getting past the bitterness. What are the effects of bitterness?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of times I think we take that pretty lightly as far as thinking that, well, someone hurt me. I deserve to be resentful, angry, bitter. Now, it is normal to have some anger when there's injustice, when people are crossing boundaries, when people have done something to hurt us. That's normal, and I would say even healthy, and it can be a very good thing. But when we allow that anger to fester over a long period of time, when we hang on to it, when it becomes destructive potentially to other people and, of course, even to ourselves, that's where it starts to become toxic anger, which is, in my mind, bitterness, resentment. And yeah, there's some major issues that we find when we look at the literature related to both our mental and physical health, and also even our relational health when we hang on to bitterness. And yes, one of the things that I've just noticed, and I'd be curious to what your take is too as a therapist, when I talk with people that have been hurt and they're still hanging on to that, it's like always in the back of their mind, even if they're not consciously thinking about it, it seems to be really affecting them. It seems to be like just in the background, affecting their emotions, affecting their thoughts, and in essence, stressing them out.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, and I've often thought about how most people, and it's interesting you said something too, that how it's harmful. We don't often realize the person who is experiencing the most harm is the person who is bitter. So we're holding on to it like it's somehow going to hurt and vindicate us. But in fact, what it does is it harms us, the one who's the bitter person.
That's exactly it. And so what some of the literature shows is that it actually increases the likelihood of anxiety and depression. It also increases a sense of victimhood. And one of the big things that we talk about in psychology and psychiatry in people being able to move forward in life and be successful is actually having what we call an internal locus of control, which is kind of a victor mentality. That, yeah, I can't control everything that's happening around me, but I can control how I respond. I'm not a victim kind of thing. But when we hang on, we keep thinking about how someone has hurt us and how wrong that is and how they deserve to pay and they haven't paid. That actually fosters a victim mentality, external locus of control, and that makes it very difficult to be psychologically healthy.
Yeah, and I think about it too, as you're talking about that, I'm visualizing it's sort of like attaching strings to every part of you, and those strings are extending to the person who hurt you. So rather than just have it be a situational thing where they've hurt you, you have now permanently attached yourself to them, and they're deciding all of your movements, all of your thoughts, and everything else going forward as long as you hold on to that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because literally what you're saying is that not only were you potentially victimized by this person once because they hurt you, but you continue to allow yourself to be victimized in your thoughts by them. And they continue to hurt you, even though they're not maybe actively doing something to hurt you, because you're allowing them, they're living on in your mind, and it actually becomes worse and worse and worse. And a lot of times I find that the bitterness that we can hang on to actually becomes more harmful and hurtful than the initial insult and wound that person did.
It's kind of like PTSD, when you have PTSD, so often one of the symptoms can be like flashbacks. It's not actually happening anymore, but it's as though it's happening over and over and over again, the trauma.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And so it leads not only to that sense of victimhood, but also it can lead to physical health things as well. Like, for example, cardiovascular problems, a weakened immune system, inflammation and pain, sleep disturbances, digestive problems, and for some of us who are a little bit more vain, it can even lead to accelerated aging. So if there's no other reason...
If nothing else stops you, vanity.
Right. No, and I'm kind of saying this half jokingly, but it is a very serious thing. So, it affects our mental health, our physical health, and then on top of that, our relational health. Because what we find too is that when we are bitter, that taints our picture not only of that person, but it actually starts affecting our core beliefs about people in general and about the world and how unfair the world is and how there's so many people out to get us, for example. And so we start to tend to be more suspicious of people than is necessary. And we start to be mistrustful of others. And of course, that can lead to frequent conflict. It can lead to increased isolation and in the long run, really impairment of relationships. And we know one of the most important things to happiness, actually the most important thing is what the literature says, is connection.
Yeah.
And if we are fostering this sense of suspicion, mistrust, poor relationships, at least somewhat affected by our resentment or bitterness, that can really impair our whole life in so many ways.
Yeah. And I heard you talk about, the cognitive distortion of overgeneralization. So we take one person maybe that we've dealt with that has caused us some pain or bitterness and hurt, and we then lump everybody into that as though everyone else has that. And then you also talked about social disadvantages, and one of those social disadvantages is not just that you become suspicious, but in your suspiciousness, you're talking about it all the time. And I don't know about you, but those aren't generally the people that I like to spend my time with. If I have a choice of who I spend time with, obviously I might have to work with these people, not at our place though, fortunately, but I might have to be around this person all the time at work, or this person's in my family, and every time we get together as a family, I just don't want to be there anymore because I know exactly what I'm going to hear, and it grates on you.
Absolutely. And so, I think about the difference between someone that is frequently complaining and thinking negatively and looking at the world like through, those dark colored glasses versus someone who's like grateful and trying to find the good in things. It's like, who would we rather be around? Right.
Yeah.
So what we see is that in essence, bitterness is like fuel for toxic stress. And so it stresses us, and that's why it affects, our body, it affects our mental health, it affects our relationships. And of course, some of us, we might wonder, well, if there's so many negative effects for bitterness, resentment, mentally, emotionally, relationally, physically, why do people still hang on to?
Yeah, why can't we let it go if it's so bad for us? Why do we keep holding on to it for so long?
Yeah, and it's something that, I've thought a lot about, and I've kind of observed people, and it's not an easy answer, and I'd be interested in your take on it too. But, I think there's a couple things that really come up for me. Number one, I think that a lot of people feel like if I let go of the anger, the resentment, the bitterness, then I'm actually going to be vulnerable to be hurt again. And so they have this idea that I need to hang on to that
bitterness and resentment because it's kind of like a shield. It keeps you from
sure.
being hurt again.
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a bit too because, of course, I also want to protect myself from getting into a habit of bitterness, but it can feel almost addictive because, and one of the things I've noticed working with so many people who've gone through this, and I don't think any one of us is exempt from having the opportunity for bitterness and hurt, but is that when we hold on to it, we tend to think about it. And when we think about it, our brains don't necessarily know the difference between doing productive work versus just doing work. And so that worrying, the perseveration, the rumination on it feels like we're doing something. And so we get a dopamine hit when we do work, but we don't realize this is like disastrous work. And all it does is keep me in the trauma, in the hurt, in the pain. I have a quote that I love to use. You can get a cactus, but you don't have to sit on it.
That's very true.
And I'm like, wow, how many of us have gotten cactuses in our life or cacti, and we're sitting in them, and we're not just sitting in them, we're rubbing our behinds in them over and over and over again. And I've often thought, I don't want to do that to myself.
Yeah, good point. And that is an interesting thing because I could see how, because there are a lot of those neurotransmitters that are released, when we have, even with the negative feelings attached, so to speak, there still can be that, almost that reward, that positive reinforcement. One other piece that I think people struggle with is they feel like, okay, if I let it go, I'm actually letting that person off the hook. I'm saying that what they did was okay. I'm letting them get off scot-free, kind of.
Yeah, no punishment.
Yeah. And so then they feel like that's just totally not fair. So how could I actually let it go, right? How could I forgive?
Mm-hmm. So that in mind, why we hold on to it so long, what is forgiveness then? Because I hear so many people there are about as many different definitions for forgiveness as there are people, because we all have our own version and meaning that we assign to forgiveness. So do you have like an Oxford Dictionary definition for us, or a psychological definition for us?
I actually do. And as part of that, I want people to contextualize, and I think this is going to become increasingly clear with the definition. But one of the most important things as we think about forgiveness and truly like letting go in the best sense of the word, and letting go is not fully forgiveness. So I need to be clear on that. But is that as we forgive, that's one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is actually maintaining healthy boundaries. And so one big thing I always say is, just because we decide to forgive, it doesn't mean we trust. Forgiveness is given, but trust is
earned.
That's right. And so we have to keep reminding ourselves of that. Forgiveness is not saying what they did was okay. It's not condoning the act. It's not hating the cruelty of the act. But instead, well, let me give you the American Psychological Association definition, which I actually really like. It says forgiveness involves willfully. So willfully involves a choice, right? Putting aside feelings of resentment towards someone who has committed a wrong, been unfair or hurtful, or otherwise harmed you in some way. So in other words, it's making a choice to set aside those feelings of resentment for someone that's harmed us, right? Forgiveness is not merely accepting what happened or ceasing to be angry. Rather, it involves a voluntary transformation of your feelings, attitudes, and behavior so that you are no longer dominated by resentment. And this is the kicker that I thought was really amazing that they included this. So it's not just that we're not dominated by resentment, but here's the positive part: can actually express compassion, generosity, or the like toward the person who wronged you. When I read that, I was like, wow, that's actually a very holistic definition of forgiveness. And I agree with that. I really do.
It sounds a lot like taking off something and putting something else on.
That's a good analogy. I like that.
Like, I'm not going to carry this around. I'm going to take it off and put on something else instead. So, in essence, what you talked about earlier of, it doesn't mean that I have to hold on to it as though because I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt again. It's the awareness that I still have the ability to have boundaries and that sort of thing, but I'm not going to carry it as though it's the only way I'll remember to protect myself later.
That's right. And instead, like you said, I'm putting on actually a sense of over time, and this certainly doesn't happen right away, usually for most people. Maybe, there's miraculous times where it can, but where we truly start to even develop a sense of compassion for that person, and maybe even wanting to see if there's some way that we can help them. But again, that doesn't mean that we're going to have poor boundaries, right? And it doesn't mean we're going to trust them. It doesn't mean we're going to reconcile with them. That's a whole different thing. Forgiveness is actually prerequisite for true reconciliation, but reconciliation does not have to happen with forgiveness, because reconciliation takes two parties being willing to do the work.
Yeah, and I mentioned this in one of the podcasts we had on, honoring your parents. The boundaries are important because sometimes when people offend us or hurt us or whatever they do that requires the forgiveness, which means I can't forgive unless I acknowledge something was done, is that when I acknowledge what they've done, I am now able to maybe even see them differently than I've seen them before. It makes a one-dimensional person become maybe three-dimensional. And so I can see how I might even be able to relate to them in some ways. Maybe some of my own life has paralleled some of the things that they've done, or even see the hurt and pain that might have brought them to that point, which then how can I maybe even help them? It doesn't mean I have to help them, but see how people like that can be helped.
Yes. And we're going to get into that later when I talk a little bit about how we actually forgive, because that's a key element in that process. So,
well, let's talk about the benefits of it, because we talked about the ill effects of not forgiving and holding on to bitterness and anger. So what are the benefits of letting go of that and forgiving?
Well, we could almost say it's the opposite of the effects of bitterness. In other words, research shows that people that practice forgiveness have both mental and physical health benefits. Obviously, less anger. That's a no-brainer, right? Less anxiety, depression, decreased stress, better sleep, better confidence, more hopeful for the future. And then physically, it actually reduces pain, which is interesting, right? Improves cholesterol levels, lower blood pressure, and lower risk of heart attack. I thought it was especially interesting that point of reduced pain, because if you think about it, pain, of course, happens peripherally or centrally or whatever, but it's perceived where? It's perceived
in the
right
brain.
here. And so if we're already suffering with, we might say, I want to be careful how I say this. I want to say self-inflicted pain. And the reason I say that is, yes, someone else hurt us, but we keep going over and over.
The sitting on the cactus part.
Yes, it's the sitting on. Maybe someone else gave us that cactus. Maybe they even tried to throw it at us, but then we keep going and sitting on it, right?
Yeah.
So I like that.
Or we keep catching it every time they throw it at us.
Good point. And so then, of course, we're going to be more sensitive to pain in general. And so even physically, we're going to start experiencing more of that.
Yeah.
And then there's relational benefits as well. Obviously, it's going to increase the likelihood, like we talked, opposite of bitterness, that we connect with people in a better way. But one of the most fascinating benefits that I found is that they actually did one study, and they were looking at psychological distress, and they basically wanted to see the mental health outcome for people that experienced certain degrees of psychological distress. So like basically trauma, right? And so what they did is they measured people's trauma levels
And then they measured their mental health outcomes, and they wanted to see, were there different mediating factors that would influence their mental health factors after going through trauma. And what they found was astounding. Basically, they found that there was a subset of people in the studies who scored high on measures of forgiveness. And those ones, even if they had high lifetime stress and trauma and that sort of thing, it did not predict poor mental health outcomes. And the researchers were actually astounded, because what they found is that it was like, okay, yeah, we expect that forgiveness will help a little bit. But the lead researcher, Toussaint, he actually said, the power of forgiveness to erase the link was surprising. We thought forgiveness would knock something off the relationship between stress and psychological distress, but we didn't expect it to zero it out. And so basically, it was like they were comparable to the people that didn't have the trauma, that didn't have the stress. Why? Because of forgiveness.
So it's not how many cactuses you get, it's what you do with them.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, you might have, a couple bleeding wounds and that sort of thing, but you can still end up having a great life, even if you have a few wounds in the process. And I'd go as far as to say, like, we all go through things. Now, it's true. Some people go through way more than others. So I'm not trying to minimize that. But again, the good news is there is an antidote for still having a good life, even after trauma.
Yeah. And, I think too, if somebody really wanted to get the benefit out of whatever hurt or pain they caused me, they would get the most benefit if I didn't just, proverbially catch the cactus and sit on it. But if I kept re-inflicting that over and over and over again, whereas they would get the least benefit. Let's just say they're the most cruel person ever. They would get less from me, or less out of me in turn, or less out of their pain that they inflicted if I didn't take it and keep sitting on it.
Exactly.
And so I'm actually doing myself a favor by forgiving versus holding on to it and carrying it with me.
And you're allowing,
in terms of them, even.
Absolutely. You're allowing way less control allowing way less, them to have way less control of your life now or in the future. And so that's powerful. And to me, that's the best way to actually move past, is to say, okay, this person no longer has power in my life. And how do I not allow this person to have power? Well, it's actually working through forgiveness.
Yeah. So how do we forgive? Like, that's a big topic too.
Yes.
Within the definition of forgiveness requires, like, well, what am I doing when I'm forgiving?
Right. Well, and I want to get to that. I want to say one other quick thing, and that is that the longer I'm in mental health, I've been a psychiatrist now for, over 15 years. And the longer I'm in mental health, the more firmly I believe that when we have bitterness, resentment, it almost acts like a cage in a way, like around our heart, or at least around that wound. And we can actually be healed from past trauma. We can't actually truly move on. We can't be free until we go through forgiveness. And so if any of our listeners are like, man, I just feel stuck, like I just really can't move forward in my life, and I feel like, I'm just not getting healed, even though I'm doing all this therapy and all this stuff. Could it be that maybe you haven't truly forgiven? And, I'm not saying one way or another, but maybe a reflection question, maybe something to really search your heart on.
Yeah, I think that I like that you said that too, because I've been hearing some things, even people who are experiencing cancer, and I've heard even cancer patients say this, where I know where the cancer came from. It was because of this thing that happened in my life, and I've been holding on to it, and it's actually eating me up.
Wow. Not
just proverbially, but literally eating me up. And they're like, I know I need to let go of this. I know I need to take care of this. I'm like, wow, that's huge to admit that. But, there's a lot of research behind that too that's saying, well, we know too that every thought that we have contributes to either the lessening or inducing of cortisol in our bodies, and cortisol is an inflammatory, and it's the precursor to all disease too, is inflammation. So
absolutely has such a huge effect, and again, both physically, mentally, relationally. So yeah,
how do we forget?
How do we forget? Hopefully by now we're thinking, okay, maybe this is a good idea. How do we do it? Well, as I was doing research on this topic, I found some excellent researchers, but two really stood out. One is Bob Enright, and he's done a lot of great research. Really appreciate the research he's done. For me personally, I really gravitated to one other researcher, and his name is Dr. Ev Worthington. And he was a professor. Now he's retired, but he was working at Virginia Commonwealth University. And he has authored or co-authored over 40 books and hundreds of scientific papers on forgiveness. So this guy has done a lot of research.
He's the expert.
Yeah, he's like, him and Dr. Enright are really the big experts. He developed a model for forgiveness called the REACH model. And one thing I really appreciate about Dr. Worthington is that not only does he have a theoretical knowledge of forgiveness, but he also has a very experiential knowledge of forgiveness. So I want to tell a little story about Dr. Worthington to our listeners and to you. And that is, he was doing research for about 10 years on forgiveness. And I'm sure he had little slights that he had to, forgive and practice that on a regular basis. He's like,
so that's why we go into that research.
Right. Yeah. He was like, okay, this is good. This is good. But there was one day, about 10 years into his research, that something tragic took place in his life. And so basically, there was a 25-year-old young man who broke into his mother's house at night, and he was just a stranger. But this man broke into his mother's house and brutally beat his mother, murdered his mother, and just left her there in the house and stole a bunch of her valuables and was gone. And they did catch him, and he did, of course, go to prison. And for Dr. Worthington, this was extremely difficult. He was close to his mother, and it was just such a shock, right? And so he struggled. He was like, okay, I've been doing all this research on forgiveness, and now this is really putting the research to the test. So Dr. Worthington, amazingly, he went through, he said, okay, I'm going to, over time, it wasn't the next day, right? Because he wrote about how he really had a lot of anger, a lot of resentment. He wanted that guy to pay, and he wanted to have revenge on him. And he had a lot of negative and probably even murderous thoughts towards him.
Yeah.
But he put his model into practice. And the beautiful thing is that he did forgive him. And eventually he even went to visit that man in prison.
Wow.
And he later reflected that this was an essential part of his understanding of forgiveness, not just as a psychological process, but as a moral and spiritual decision that could help both the victim and the perpetrator. And he experienced, when he went there, that the perpetrator, the man who killed his mom, responded with surprise and deep emotion. And he really expressed remorse for the crime. And so it was actually a very beautiful story. And that's not the only reason I like his model, but you can see that he has a lot of that personal aspect too.
Do you want to share with us a little bit about the REACH model?
Yeah, I would love to. So the REACH model, it's an acronym, and essentially, and here's a plug for Dr. Worthington's material. I would encourage our listeners you can just go online and put in Ev Worthington and forgiveness. If you just put in those keywords, you'll find his website, and he's a really neat, giving Christian man. And basically, he has put all of his resources online for free.
And so, because he just wants people to experience the freedom of forgiveness. And he has all these do-it-yourself forgiveness processes. And so, in our podcast, it's not going to be like, oh, you just listen to this and then you're just going to be able to forgive instantaneously. I don't think. I mean, that'd be wonderful, but forgiveness takes some work, right?
Yeah.
And so you can go online, you can download his do-it-yourself resources and actually if you are willing to put the work in. And that's what his research has actually shown. Usually it takes, roughly 5-6 hours or so. And the more hours people are willing to put in, the more successful they are to actually forgiving.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh man, 6 hours. But if you think about how much time do you think sometimes people spend ruminating on?
Some people all day, every night, throughout the night, they can't even sleep because they're thinking about it. It would be worth it to give up that much time to work on that.
Yeah, and you certainly don't have to do it all in one chunk. Yeah. So, I would really highly recommend you go online, you check out his resources, and I think you will be encouraged and it will make that process much easier for you. So yeah, the REACH model, what it actually stands for, let's start with the R, is R stands for recall the hurt. And basically with that one, what's interesting is that we almost think like, oh, well, if it hurts, I don't want to, think about it. I just would rather not. A lot of times it's what our natural tendency is. But research actually shows that individuals who revisit their hurt are more likely to forget. You have to feel to heal. You have to feel to heal. And so instead of suppressing, we need to actually remember what happened and then and really face the fact that we have been hurt and then make a decision to forgive. And this is an interesting part of the forgiveness process, because what we see with forgiveness is that there's a decisional part, but then there's an emotional part. Now, which one do you think might be easier than
decisional part?
Usually, right?
Yes, usually.
Yeah, usually the decisional
emotions are the hardest ones.
Yes, exactly. And so this is the part where you want to try to get to that point where you're deciding, you're saying, okay, I'm remembering what happened. I'm even remembering what it felt like. It didn't feel good. It was very painful. I'm facing that. But despite that, I'm deciding not to pursue payback. And I want to treat the person as a valuable person.
How about the E?
Okay, so the E actually stands for empathizing with the offender. Empathizing with the offender. And this is where it can get pretty challenging. And this is where we start moving more towards the emotional part of forgiveness.
I would have thought the E would have been further to the end at reach. I guess it's not how to spell reach.
Yeah, I know. But he gets right into it. And I love how he says, look, maybe if you don't get it right away, like you can come back to it later. So it's a fluid. Yeah. So and that's what Dr. Worthington shares is like, go through it. And, sometimes it takes going through it again and again. And that's one thing I've realized too, when I've had to forgive people that really hurt me, is that it's almost like sometimes there's layers of forgiveness. And sometimes I even feel like, yes, I've forgiven. But then like 2 hours later, I have another thought, or they do something else.
Refer your thoughts is every time to go back to that.
It's not a one time. So the E stands for empathize. One of the best exercises that people can do with this is that they call it the empty chair exercise. And essentially with the empty chair exercise, it would be like, you and I have two chairs right here, except for yours was empty. And I was just sitting here and pretending like you were there, but you're not actually there. And so then I'm telling the offender like how terrible what they did to me was and how it affected me and how mad I am, say everything that I want to tell them, right, to their face. And then the really powerful part is then you get up and you actually get in the other chair.
Yes. Yeah,
and as you're sitting in the other chair, you're pretending to be the person that actually hurt you. And you're sharing your side of the story. Now, the people could say, well, you're just making excuses or whatever, but you're really trying to put yourself in their shoes and you're really trying to explain maybe some of the reasons, or maybe it even has to do with like, well, I was raised in an abusive household myself, and I never learned how to treat people properly, So
Your being angry makes me feel like I'm more powerful when somebody was angry with me, or, it's my way of feeling like I have some power because I'm deeply insecure inside and I know what to do with that insecurity.
absolutely, exactly. And so to me, this is actually one of the most powerful parts of the whole process, because over time, as you're really trying to put yourself in that other person's shoes, you're starting to develop some feelings of empathy towards them. And it can be a game changer.
This is really good for me to hear because when I first became a therapist, I was deeply fascinated by the mindset of people who did horrific things because I wanted to know, what do you have to be thinking? What do you have to experience in order to do the kinds of things that I would never imagine doing? And so I guess I got to do a little bit of that, even though those people weren't necessarily hurting me. But yeah, I was able to see some of the pain that probably instigated those behaviors.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we often don't think about it, but, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to keep reminding ourselves of, it's almost never that some sort of abuse or truly harmful behavior comes out just out of the blue. Like usually there's, some background, some story to that. And again, that doesn't excuse it.
No.
But understanding a little bit more can give us a sense of compassion towards that person and saying, wow, that person's really wounded. And in reality, they're the one that is actually suffering the most. They're the one that is most like caged by their own negative mindset and their toxic behavior and this sort of thing. And boy, I wish they could experience freedom and joy and peace and all those things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So moving on
A.
to A. Yes, A actually stands for altruistic gift. So it's true that, if we're motivated to forgive because we know it's going to help our mental health and all that, that's great. But what's even more powerful and what research shows is even more beneficial is when we're truly giving it as a gift, and we're forgiving not only for ourselves, but altruistically to actually benefit even the wrongdoer. And in so doing, we actually enjoy even greater benefits. And then the C stands for commit. So now that we've kind of gone through that process, we've made the decision to forgive. We're starting to develop empathy towards the perpetrator. We've actually want to give that as a gift, not only for ourselves, but to benefit them. Now we're committing. We're saying, okay, I'm going to write a note and basically say, today I forgave Amanda for hurting me. And that actually helps our forgiveness last, because it's kind of like a commitment, like the commitment card, right? When we make that firm decision and then we keep that card, and when we're doubting whether we forgave, then actually this goes on to the holding on piece, the H part. We look at our note of commitment and we say, oh, even though I'm doubting my forgiveness because these negative feelings came up, I actually did forgive. And so we're holding on to that. And by the way, having negative feelings come up again, even feelings of resentment or anger or whatever, doesn't mean that we haven't forgiven. It just means that our emotions are still like, wait a minute, you have to protect yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of that protective mechanism. We can be like, okay, thank you, emotions, but we forgave, and yes, we are going to continue to put boundaries, all right? So it doesn't mean that we haven't forgiven, and we can remind ourselves of those.
I think that's so important, because so often I hear people go, well, why am I feeling this way then? I forgave them, or I committed to this or whatever. But it's natural for us for those feelings to come up, especially if they haven't been trained fully. And so as they are reminded, hey, we're holding on to this commitment to forgive this person, then it's like, okay, now I don't have a reason to keep coming up as often. And then the feelings learn to do their thing.
Exactly. That's it.
So is there a lot of people who listen to us know that we have another side of things that we also like to incorporate into mental health. Is there a role for spirituality in forgiveness?
Absolutely. So research has actually shown that prayer, regardless of what religion, actually does help people to forgive more readily. For example, those who said a brief prayer for their romantic partner were less likely to exhibit retaliatory motives when presented with statements such as, "When my partner wrongs me, I do something to even the score."
Good to know.
Yes. So that's just general spirituality. But what was really interesting is from Dr. Worthington's research, he found that for Christians, there is a gain in forgiveness that is twice what the usual gain is when people are going through forgiveness work. So there's something about the Christian experience that actually fosters the forgiveness mindsets.
What is that gain regarding?
So basically, you're twice as likely to forgive,
Oh, okay.
and you forgive essentially twice as fast, and you're in the magnitude of forgiveness, so to speak, is
Maybe the freedom response that you get to is magnified as well.
absolutely. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts, Amanda, but yeah, any thoughts you have of why Christian forgiveness might actually be a little different?
The first thing that comes to mind is just remembering that, how Christ forgave those who hurt him. And anytime I go through something and it feels like somebody is going through it with me, I'm not alone through that process. And there's lots of research that shows when you're going through pain, if somebody just holds your hand or is there beside you, like you feel less pain actually. And so I think that would be one of the bigger benefits of that spiritual awareness is that, I'm not going through this alone. Someone went through this before me who's bigger than all of these problems that I might be experiencing, and that, in effect, he's going through this with me right now too. It's not something that only I've experienced, and he's taken on everything.
Oh, that's beautiful. I really appreciate, like you pointed out, that Christ really gave us that example of forgiveness, and then he walks with us through our own process as well. And, one other thing that I would add is that there's no other religion where forgiveness is actually so central to the religion. In other words, all of the religions actually, it has to do with working our way into the favor of God. Christianity is actually the only religion where forgiveness is, we cannot work our way into the favor of God. God is already saying, "You are my beloved child. I just want you to accept the gift of forgiveness. I want to forgive you."
Yeah, he's forgiven us first.
That's right. And so, I think that when we understand the beauty, that the heart of God and how he's not holding things over our head, then that touches our own heart. And it actually makes us then want more ready to say, well, if God forgave me for all that junk I did, then maybe I should consider, forgiving somebody else too.
As you say that, I'm thinking, do we have somebody who's listening right now that's like, why do I need God? Because I don't have anything that I need to be forgiven for. I'm not like a horrible person or anything like that. I was having a conversation with somebody, a client yesterday, and we were talking about, this concept, not in exactly forgiveness, but how this person felt like, somebody had done something wrong and how they didn't, they deserved anything that they got from it. And we talked about, the saying, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world dead. Is there anything you're blind? Yeah, sorry. Thank you. I just, sometimes, we feel like we're good people or we haven't done anything wrong, but what would happen if I had to ask everybody else if they thought I did anything so you're blind? And so if Christ has forgiven us or even taken the place of what we deserved, then there's probably something that somebody else thinks that I've done that's why I need that forgiveness. Even if they don't offer it, Christ has offered it from me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's we could get into such a topic there, because I think part of the problem is that we don't actually realize, how much wrong, quote unquote, we really have done. Like you said, like naturally we tend to kind of excuse, our own behavior. So yeah, I don't want to get too
really good in our own.
Yes, exactly. I did want to end though with one story that really, I think, encapsulates how decisional forgiveness can eventually lead to emotional forgiveness, and really how the spiritual elements can work together with that. And I think you're familiar with Corrie ten Boom, right? Mm-hmm. So Corrie ten Boom was a very amazing lady. She was alive during World War II, and she lived in the Netherlands, correct?
I believe so. Yeah, I don't remember exactly where.
And she was not Jewish, but she and her family were very partial to trying to help Jews, because they saw like they are not being treated right at all. And so what they did is they created, a hiding place, and that's the name of her main book, A Hiding Place, or The Hiding Place. Anyway.
That's a good question. Yeah. It's something close enough. We'll get it with Corrie ten.
With Corrie ten Boom. And basically in their house, they hid Jews. And it was working great for a while. But then pretty soon the Nazis found out, and they were arrested. Her whole family was arrested and taken to a concentration camp. She never saw her father again. But she was actually in the concentration camp with her sister, who was also her best friend. Her name was Betsy. And Corrie was the only one from the family that actually ended up surviving the war. And afterwards, she not only wrote about it, but she went to different places speaking about her experience and sharing how God had sustained her and even given her the capacity to forgive. Well, this story actually comes out of what happened at one of these places where she was sharing her story. And I just want to read it in her own words. It says, "It was in a church in Munich where I was speaking in 1947 that I saw him, a balding, heavy-set man in a gray overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. One moment I saw the overcoat and the brown hat. The next, a blue uniform and a visored cap with its skull and crossbones. Memories of the concentration camp came back with a rush. The huge room with its sparse overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment of skin. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp where we were sent. Now he was in front of me, hand thrust out. So you can only imagine, here's this guy that's been super abusive, and now he's saying, he's coming up to you, right? Hand thrust out. A fine message, Fräulein. How good it is to know that, as you say, all our sins are at the bottom of the sea. It was the first time since my release that I had been face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he was saying. I was a guard there, but since that time, he went on, I have become a Christian. I know that God has forgiven me for the cruel things I did there, but I would like to hear it from your lips as well. Fräulein, again, the hand came out. Will you forgive me? And I stood there and could not. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking. But forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the hearts. I just love that quote. It's my quote. It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I had ever had to do. For I had to do it. I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who have injured us. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, Jesus says, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. Still, I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Jesus, help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so, woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands. And then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried with all my heart. For a long moment we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then.
Wow. I feel like we should just go out on that one. Oh. I love how she recognizes that it's not the feeling that starts, it's the will that starts, and then God supplies the feeling in response.
That's right. And that's really my hope and my prayer for all of us, that, we can't change our hearts, but what we can do is choose to allow God to work a miracle in our hearts and to set us free, because, forgiveness is really all about setting a prisoner free and realizing that that prisoner was me.
Well, thank you so much for listening. I hope that as you think about, that question that I asked at the beginning, have you ever been hurt by someone and felt like you just couldn't get past the anger and bitterness, that you would consider, not just the benefits of forgiveness, but the power of it too.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Your engagement will help us reach more people who need encouragement. To hear more episodes, learn about our other mental health resources, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.